Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience. I would like to invite everyone to take a seat in front of your screen because we would like to start our online book launch. As a short technical information, I would like to remind you that this is a webinar, so only the speakers will be visible on the screen. And if you have questions, then please use the chat function of the Zoom meeting so you can raise your question for the speakers. Okay, now the Facebook Live is on as well, so there is no obstacle to start. So, good afternoon and also good morning for those guests who join us from overseas. I would like to welcome everyone on the book online launch of the Western Balkan Playbooks, the competition for influence among foreign actors, a collection of papers that was initiated by my colleague Gergely Varga, who is a senior research fellow of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, and who specialized in U.S. foreign policy. And the main idea was to analyze the foreign actors' presence in the Western Balkan region from the perspective of those external actors about which we hear a lot and whose presence sometimes create lots of debate and also has a very important impact on the EU integration process of the Western Balkan region. And as the Institute is very much engaged in the research on the Western Balkan region, I believe it's very important that we also cover this topic from the perspective of those external actors. And as a research fellow and also program manager for the region, I'm very happy that I have also the opportunity to work together with those experts that are covering those foreign actors, and they share their knowledge and experience with us here. But before we start the discussion about the book itself, I would like to give the floor first to the director of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, Mr. Márton Ugrósdy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, and I would also like to welcome everybody in front of their screens, and especially Commissioner Várhelyi, who has agreed to our invitation. And I'm really glad that he is here because, surprisingly or not, the EU is not part of the book that we are just presenting, but it's a very important factor, obviously, in the Western Balkans, and I think there is no better person to explain that what the European Union is up to in Southeast Europe than the Commissioner himself. So I'm looking forward to his remarks, but before that, I would like to also thank our colleague, Gergely Varga, who has been instrumental in initiating this book and also making it happen. The first copies have just arrived from the press store office today, so we're going to distribute this book also in a material format if you wish, but special thanks goes to Gergely, who's having his last days with us today because he's going to leave the Institute tomorrow. So I would like to thank him once again for the effort, for the contribution, and also for being with us for the last 2.5 years. And I think this is a great opportunity for him to say goodbye with this remarkable piece of publication, which is out today. And just a few words about the book itself. It looks at the influence of foreign actors like the United States, China, Russia, Turkey, and Germany on the Western Balkans. And this is a very timely topic because if we look at what is going on the ground, we see that we talk a lot about different foreign actors. We talk a lot about how outside players who might be thousands of kilometers away from the region itself are trying to make their interests adhered to in these 6 countries. And we tend to talk a little bit less about a player which is next door, which is spending a lot of money incomparable to any other players in the region, which is the European Union. So once again, I'm looking forward to the remarks of His Excellency the Commissioner. But I'm also looking forward to the contributions of the authors of the book who have agreed to join us today for this webinar, and also Ambassador Vesko Garčević, who's calling from Boston this morning or afternoon, depending on the time zone, who has a great amount of expertise in the region, and he's been playing a very instrumental role in the EU and NATO integration of Montenegro for a long time. So thank you all for joining, and I'm looking forward to this event. And without any further ado, I would like to kindly ask Commissioner Várhelyi to deliver his remarks.
Thank you very much. Kellemes délutánt kívánok mindenkinek. Dear Director Ugrósdy, dear participants, first of all, let me congratulate you for the publication of the Western Balkans Playbook. As it is clearly stated in the foreword, I very much welcome this academic contribution to our work, which has a common goal to make the Western Balkans more stable, more secure, more prosperous, and to bring it into the European Union. This common goal was highlighted also during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the Western Balkan partners had privileged access to many initiatives otherwise reserved for member states. In short, they were treated
It seems that we might have a bit technical problem. Hopefully we will have the voice of the commissioner back soon. I'm not sure whether he hears us, so I will also write him. Mm-hmm. We will wait a second. Maybe, hopefully, the connection with the commissioner will be restarted. So I do not want to take the floor of the commissioner. So let's wait for a second. So it might be resolved. But if not, obviously we will continue with the rest of the event. But obviously, the priority is to have the commissioner back and listen to his comments and keynote speech. Mm. As long as we are waiting for the commissioner to return, let me just then continue with a short introduction on the book. So at least we will have some insight on the background idea of this volume and how it was launched by, as it was mentioned, by Gergely Varga. So, okay, the commissioner is back, so I will give back the floor. Thank you. Seems that the connection is still unstable on the side of the commissioner. But let me wait a second because he is still there, but unfortunately there is no picture and voice to that. Okay, we can see you, Mr. Commissioner. Hopefully the voice will be, yes, and we can also see you. So hopefully the connection will be fine now.
Sorry about this.
No problem. I mute myself then.
Okay. So despite the COVID-19 pandemic, our work taking forward the enlargement policy continued. As you know, enlargement to the Western Balkans is a priority for this Commission. Bringing the whole region into the EU is in the best interest of all of us. The EU is and will remain the Western Balkans' biggest trading partner, investor, and donor. And the EU integration remains the wish of an overwhelming majority of the region's people and its economy. But to preserve our influence, the EU needs to deliver on its promises. If the EU's commitment is strong and present, the transformative power of the European perspective is also stronger. To address the root causes of the present doubts and challenges, we have revised our approach and adopted what we call the new enlargement methodology. Our revised methodology aims to strengthen the credibility, the predictability of the enlargement process, while adding dynamism and political steer. And of course, keeping the fundamental democratic rule of law reforms at the center of it. Our support is, however, much more comprehensive. Let me give you a couple of recent examples. The EU is providing significant support in the region, as you know, be it the vaccination campaign or the economic recovery. Earlier this month, I visited the region for the first deliveries of a total of 651,000 Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines that the EU is providing to the Western Balkans. The doses are being delivered in weekly tranches to each of the Western Balkan countries and should serve to all healthcare workers. Some of the most vulnerable groups are vaccinated quickly. A significant amount of the 70 million euros of grant we have made available to purchase the vaccines is still available, and we are working with member states to make more vaccines available for resale. Of course, we shouldn't forget that economically, the Western Balkans and the EU are already deeply intertwined and integrated. Last year, 68% of the trade of the region was with the EU, and because of our preferential trade arrangements, this is mostly tariff-free. And the EU is also the source of more than 60% of the region's foreign direct investments. Therefore, we have a strong stake in its economic recovery. Last October, we have put forward an economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans with up to 28 billion euros of funding, with the ambition to leverage investments in the areas of infrastructure, energy, green and digital transition to create sustainable growth and jobs in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. When it comes to individual partners, we are working hard to move on the accession process forward. First and foremost, we need to make sure that the first intergovernmental conferences with Albania and North Macedonia are going to be held this month. Once, of course, the negotiating frameworks are adopted by the member states. The enlargement policy is a merit-based process, and both countries have delivered. The EU's credibility is at stake, as we all know, and we are working very closely with the Portuguese presidency to overcome the remaining outstanding issues. 10 days ago, I visited, together with the Portuguese Foreign Minister, Augusto Santos Silva, Sofia and Skopje to design the next steps together. We also hope that intergovernmental conferences in June with Serbia and Montenegro will be held to provide the political steer on the next steps and to inject new momentum to the accession negotiations with these countries. That both countries and the member states, that the methodology will apply to both in their negotiations. The Commission is working toward Serbia's ambition to open negotiating clusters. Serbia has taken significant steps in the EU reform in the recent months in all areas, reflected in the documents that we have just submitted to our member states within the accession framework. These are papers related to the rule of law, which is already at the Council, and our reporting to be sent this week on the progress made in the different clusters. This is an ongoing work, and Serbia needs to continue delivering tangible and substantive progress on the rule of law in line with its own action plans. Serbia also needs to meet outstanding deliverables under the two clusters the closest to opening, which is cluster 3, that is the competitiveness and inclusive growth, and cluster 4, which is the green agenda and sustainable connectivity. For Montenegro, the next milestone is meeting the rule of law interim benchmarks. No chapters will be provisionally closed before that. This requires addressing well-known issues in the areas of judiciary, media freedom, and the fight against corruption and organized crime. When it comes to Kosovo, we stand ready to engage with the new government in order to speed up EU-related reforms, building, of course, on previous achievements. There is a clear opportunity to make progress on issues such as the fight against corruption and organized crime and economic development, judging from the government program of the new government. We continue to advocate for Kosovo's visa liberalization, and we encourage the government of Kosovo to reach out to hesitant member states and build the necessary trust for a positive decision, something where we are, of course, helping Kosovo to succeed. And of course, talking about Kosovo and Serbia, we're also looking forward to the resumption of the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, which is key for both partners and for the EU, and I think for the whole continent. For Bosnia and Herzegovina, 2021 needs to be the year of reforms. The country needs to address the 14 key priorities from our opinion, assessing their application for membership. This includes electoral and constitutional reforms to ensure equal representation to all in the country without discrimination, as well as ensuring the functionality of state institutions. The EU will continue to help the parties reach a solution in line with our principles. Several other rule of law reforms are still pending. Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to demonstrate that it can deliver if it wishes to achieve the candidate status still this year. Now, let me turn to the other players maybe in the Western Balkans. Firstly, on the cooperation with the US. The United States is an important partner in driving forward the reforms and the reconciliation in the region. The EU and the US have a long and productive history of close cooperation in the Western Balkans, which has produced tangible results over the years. With the new US administration, we have continued our work. We share a strategic objective of building a prosperous, peaceful, and democratic Western Balkans that is fully integrated into the European Union. The common objective provides a solid basis for strong cooperation, and we are working on that together with our partners. The US has a key role in keeping the region on the EU path and finding a long-term solution to the remaining open issues together with the region and in line with their interests and in the interest of the EU. When it comes to other players in the Western Balkans, we are certainly aware of the rise of these external actors and the potential geopolitical impact of their activities as we closely monitor these. Of course, in an interconnected world, increasing business and investment activity in the Western Balkans by third countries, be it China, Russia, or others, can offer opportunities for the region, which has a high investors' need. However, these investments were frequently one-offs, neglect financial sustainability, and this might result in high levels of indebtedness and transfer of control over strategic assets and resources. We still consider that we are the one most present in the everyday lives of the region, be it the economy, be it the public of the region. We are the biggest investors, as I told you, we are the biggest trade partner. And after all, we are the role model for the economy of the region and also of the societies. And we are convinced that it is still the EU who offers the best possible conditions for major investments through the already mentioned economic and investment plan. This is the best way to avoid that our partners end up with non-favorable loans, for which we have seen a few examples lately. Serbia's recent decision to work with the EU on financing the upgrading of the section of Railway Corridor 10 proves the attractiveness of this offer on the ground. To conclude, our Western Balkan partners have committed to joining the EU, which demands ensuring the full adherence of any foreign-funded economic activity in the Western Balkans to our norms and standards. Even if other players have interests in the region, only the EU perspective based on shared values offers to transform societies and economies in a comprehensive and sustainable way to build their long-term prosperity, stability, and resilience. As you know, we stand by the region every single day, and there is no offer on the table that could compete with ours. But it means also that we have to work every day to deliver these offers that we put on the table. Because it's not enough to make an offer, you also have to deliver those. Finally, we would like to make this year the year of the Western Balkans. To achieve that, we want to work hard with the governments in the region and the member states to take as soon as possible all the pending decisions. In this year, we could see the acceleration of negotiations with Serbia and Montenegro. We could see finally the opening of the actual negotiations with
It seems that the technical conditions did not allow the commissioner to finish his keynote speech. It's an unfortunate because just the last messages were supposed to be sent to the audience. If he returns, we will obviously give the floor back to finish the speech. We will see within a minute whether it happens. But what we definitely can say that we can wish, okay, the commissioner is back, hopefully. Can you hear us? Unfortunately, very last part of your speech could not be heard because the connection was not working, and I'm not sure whether, no, it seems to be frozen again. Can you hear us, Mr. Commissioner? Unfortunately, the very last part of your speech could not be heard. Could you repeat? Because unfortunately, because of the frozen connection, it was, we could not hear it.
So the last element was that I think that we could make this year to be the year of the Western Balkans. Because we have very many decisions that the EU could take and which could shift progress at a very high gear. First of all, we could have the first intergovernmental conferences taking place and real negotiations starting with North Macedonia and Albania on their accession. We could see the speeding up of the accession process for both Serbia and Montenegro. We could work with the successful reforms to accomplish a candidate status for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And last but not least, we could see progress, I would say important progress, or decisive progress even, in the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. Should we all accomplish this, I think we could very well call this to be Balkans.
Definitely. Thank you very much for your keynote speech, Mr. Commissioner. I will, all this sounds very ambitious, so I wish you lots of success for the rest of this year. I mean, obviously the Slovenian presidency will do its best to bring results on the EU Western Balkans agenda. So as I mentioned, I wish you lots of success, and I would like to thank on behalf of the editors and the contributors of the book to contribute by the foreword of this volume. As Mr. Ugrósdy mentioned, the book did not focus on the EU as such, but including the foreword review is a kind of recognition that despite the book was focusing on state actors, it doesn't mean that we are not aware of the importance of the EU and its institutions when it comes to the Western Balkan region and its strategic future and what role the EU plays in this regard. So thank you very much for your support and contribution.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, and now I would like to turn to the contributors of the book. And before we start, as I mentioned, I would like to give a very short introduction of the volume, which, as I mentioned, focused on the state actors and not the EU as such. I mean, obviously, when an analysis is prepared and the framework has to be established in order to provide a standardized framework of analysis, then we have to make some compromise what to analyze and how to do that. And with the contributors, it was basically agreed that involving the EU would basically break the logic of the volume, because obviously the EU as such cannot act in the same way as the state actor can. Obviously, the motivations are different. Also, the decision-making processes differs a lot, so that would make basically impossible to compare the EU as a whole with any state actors and how it pursues its policy in the region. So that's why it was decided to focus on the most important state actors. Obviously, there are other state actors that could have been included beyond Germany, Turkey, Russia, the United States, and China. But we believe that because of their importance in the region, we consider their involvement would be the most justifiable. And what was an important aim of this volume is to provide a comprehensive analysis and comparison of the policies of these actors along 4 dimensions: economic cooperation, political influence, military and defense, as well as social ties, social and cultural ties. When it comes to economy, we also, the volume, the contributors put additional attention on the energy sector as well as a key area and a special area within the economy that we thought that it would be important to cover a bit separately from the rest of the economic sphere of influence. So that can be considered the main framework of this volume, which mainly covered the period of 2008 and 2018, but also some important developments have been mentioned in the chapters from the later stage as well. So, for example, from the pandemic, the mask diplomacy of China, for example, which would have been a big mistake to miss from this volume. Before we carry on, let me also introduce the contributors. Unfortunately, not all of them can be here with us, but let me also introduce themselves just to give also recognition of their work as well. As I mentioned, the US was covered by Gergely Varga from the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, while Germany, the German foreign policy in the region was introduced by Tamás, Levente, Molnár, who is also research fellow of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade. The Institute had a former colleague who covered Russia, Sándor Ackermann, but now he's a diplomat, so he could not join this event today. But we can welcome Zoltán Egeresi from the Institute of Strategic and Defense Studies, and who is also an external fellow of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade. He is an expert on Turkey. And the chapter on China was written by 2 excellent experts, Ágnes Szunomár, who is also here with us, a senior research fellow and the head of research group on development economics at the Center of Economic and Regional Studies in the Institute of World Economics in Budapest, and Tamás, a research assistant at the Center of Economic and Regional Studies in the Institute of World Economics. So thank you for those 2 contributors who are not here today as well, but we will do our best to cover all the topics that were mentioned in the volume. Obviously, it's pretty challenging in such a limited time frame, but we will do our best to cover the major aspect of the book. As well, beyond the contributors, we can welcome among the speakers Ambassador Vesko Garčević, former ambassador of Montenegro to NATO and the OSCE in Vienna. And also he is now a professor in the University of Boston right now. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation. Beyond serving as a diplomat, he's also an expert on China and Russia in the Western Balkan region, and he's doing extensive research on the external actors in the Western Balkan region. So what I would like to ask first from our speakers, especially the authors of the chapters, to highlight the main framework and the main aim of these actors when it comes to the Western Balkan region. And if I may, I would like to go along with the chapters in the volume and turn first to Gergely Varga. The United States, as you also point out, has a bit specific relation with the region because, for example, already in 2017, the Western Balkan was not even mentioned in the strategic documents of the United States. But despite this fact, it's still a very important actor in the region, and it would be important to know why it's still like that despite this controversial situation. And what is the main framework of influence of the United States when it comes to the Western Balkan region?
Thank you very much, Anna. And on behalf of my co-editor, Tamás Levente, I would also like to thank again our co-authors of the volume and making also this event happen as well. So it is my great pleasure to participate on this evening's study volume launch. So the Western Balkan Playbook basically was coming from the idea that if we really want to simplify the question, how did Western influence change in the past 10 to 15 years, also in relation to these emerging Eastern European powers such as Russia, China. We can debate, of course, whether Turkey in this context counts as an Eastern or a Western power. That's up for debate, but certainly from an EU perspective, from a European Union perspective, Turkey is an external actor as well. And if we look back, the United States has been quite instrumental in shaping, of course, how the region today looks. Basically, the United States from the 1990s, from the middle of 1990s, as the Western interventions happened into the Balkans wars, the United States was the leading factor in basically underwriting the region's basic security framework, and has been so since the middle of the 90s. At the same time, we know that in the past about 10 years, there has been increasing concerns, especially in Europe, but partly in the United States as well, that these emerging powers are basically shaping the political, also partly the cultural environment of the region, and Europe and the United States might be losing its positions, its influence in the region. So we wanted to make a closer look at this, whether this is really true, whether the US is really in decline in the Western region as well. And of course, as it has been highlighted, but very often maybe too easily said and not very well thought through. Is it true that the US is still the prime security guarantor of the region's stability? And a lot of the factors point to that. Yes, it to a certain degree it still does. And security, military affairs, military assistance, as well as, of course, NATO membership or the offer of NATO membership to countries of the region were prime instruments of US leadership and also projecting US power and influence in the region. And it has been still the case even during the Obama years, where we saw that the US certainly did not focus on the Western Balkans as it did on other regions, especially with the pivot to Asia, but also with continuing engagement in the larger Middle East. However, with the Trump administration, we saw kind of a revival, if that is maybe a right word for that, US attention to the region. And one of the highlights of this US interest, renewed US interest and engagement was, of course, last September's grand agreement, economic agreement in Washington, D.C. between Serbia, of course, and Kosovo, which would have not really been easily imaginable 3 or 4 years before, maybe, that the United States was really disengaged again, and with such interest, such political high-level interest in the region. And obviously, the main political driver in the United States is not direct US economic interest or vital national security interest. That is not the case. It wasn't really the case during the 1990s or the time in between since these days. But of course, it's geopolitics. It's the revival of great power competition. And the Western Balkans is one of the regions where the United States observes the ascendance of Chinese and Russian influence in various ways. And especially the security, military dimension is one of the areas where the United States, as in other regions as well, is one of the core areas where the US wants to exploit its advantage, its leadership, its good position vis-a-vis Russia and China. It's maybe we can even say that the US is able to compensate in some of its weaknesses when it comes to cultural or maybe energy sectors or energy dimensions of power, especially vis-a-vis Russia, or when it comes to cheap loans, when it comes to China, of course. So certainly this security military aspects is still a vital element of the United States. At the same time, from time to time, there is some debate within the US whether or not to expand the economic and political pillar of US engagement in the region. we still have to see whether something similar develops, as for instance the 3Cs initiative for the Western Balkans. That's up for question. We haven't seen such great initiatives from the Trump administration, and I would be surprised if the new Biden administration would be that engaged and would have that much of attention to the region. Though obviously there has been and will be some, especially diplomatic engagement in trying to remain a key player in the region going forward. But with that, I would pass back the floor.
Thank you very much, Gergely. As we could hear, then the major area of influence when it comes to the US, it's related to some of the military or defense cooperation, while the other actors, as we will see, either has more diverse source of influence or channels of influence, and different frameworks to work and cooperate with the governments of the regions. The second actor I would like to deal with is Germany, which is, as an EU member state, has a very different framework of cooperation with the region, and also obviously it has its own interests when it comes to economic cooperation and stabilization of the Western Balkans. I would like to ask Tamás how he sees how the German foreign policy toward the region fits into this EU framework, and what specific interests drives the German foreign policy.
Thank you, Anna, and good afternoon from my side for everyone who tuned in. Also would like to thank to the other two co-authors of the study volume who are here present today and joined us, and also to the overseas to Ambassador Garčević, who is going to share his views about the whole topic. So a quick comment on my colleagues Gergely Varga's remark, what was our motivation behind this whole project. Indeed, we wanted to focus on how the influence of the Western powers as such changed during the last years, especially in these 10 years, what we examined. And in a nutshell, I would say that our finding is that the Western powers have certain attractiveness problems or issues, I would say, but essentially they are still the ones calling the shots in the region if we have to compare it with the non-Western authors. But coming to Anna's question about Germany and the German political and in general the German interest towards the region, if I would compare Germany with the United States is a relatively fresh or new player in the region, but Germany was there since centuries, and it has a very deep and diverse and complex relation to the countries of the Western Balkan region. And if I would have to sum up in one sentence maybe what the German interest is towards the region, as it was already mentioned in the European Union framework, also the German interest is also very similar to the European one. The overarching German interest is to support the stabilization of the region by helping the countries of the Western Balkan region in their undertaking to join the Euro-Atlantic organizations, the EU and the NATO, to promote sustainable democratic, economic, social, rule of law, environmental development in the direct neighborhood of Germany. And we didn't include the European Union because of the reasons of what also my colleague Anna Orosz mentioned. It would be a mess in our logical and academic approach to make a standardized research, but and standardized criteria. But the German Germany's current policy towards the Western Balkans can be defined as a contribution to the EU's enlargement policy, and the two are very much intertwined on several layers, and therefore also the European aspect has been mentioned in the study, especially in the German part of the study. And I would say that the German position towards the Western Balkans and the German ambitions by offering new platforms and projects for the countries of the regions have increased, at least since 2014. What I would like to mention here is the Berlin process, which is a very important, but also only a complementary tool to the EU's official enlargement policy, advancing regional cooperation and connectivity. And two patterns maybe what I would like to mention when it comes to German foreign policy towards the region, and two elements which are very interesting also in the academic literature. The one I would say is a source of slicing strategy, which means that the association process should be sliced up into a sequence of smaller units to create incentives for the countries of the region that allow to exercise pressure time and time again, which is a very important tool for the German leadership. And the other is, which is Berlin firmly supporting, is the so-called political front-loading, meaning that the sort of thorny issues should be mentioned and dealt with in the very early stages of the integration process. We have seen many examples of this political front-loading in the region. Should it be the Serbian-Kosovo talks and negotiation and peace talks and process, or when it comes to territorial issues, also between the two countries, the German leadership was very, very strong on not supporting, I would say, any kind of territorial issues. And behind or the political aspect, also the economic aspects are very very important. Germany is the most important economic and trade partners of the Western Balkan countries, but the size and the nature of the bilateral business relations are deeply unequal, both regarding the export-import ratio for Germany. Germany has a very big trade surplus with the region, with the countries in the region on the one hand, and on the other hand, what the bilateral share of the trade in comparison to the overall trade composes. Here we can see that on the one hand, for the Western Balkan countries, it's around like 10% the trade with Germany on the overall trade balance, while for Germany the share of the Western Balkan countries is extremely low. And what is important to mention also when it comes to economic and trade relations, that Germany plays a very active role in form of providing development assistance to the region. According to official data, Germany spent over 1.5 billion by and multilateral official development aid between 2014 and 17 to the region, and it is the highest by far. Coming to defense and security issues, it is very similar to the American interest. Germany is the long-term German. So again, Germany's long-term goal is to foster peace, stability, and security in the Western Balkan region. In the region, and by maintaining stabilization operations in the region on the one hand, and continuing supporting the country's efforts in joining NATO on the other hand. And finally, maybe my last remarks when it comes to social interaction, it is also something which has to be mentioned because on one hand, there is a big part of minority from all of the region, countries of the region who are living now in Germany. Their number has been increased in the 10 years that we have been examining from nowadays there are, according to official German data, about around like 1.2 million people from the Western Balkans are living in Germany. And these issues, the social issues were also very present during the peak of the migration crisis 2015. Not just because many migrants arrived through the so-called Balkan route, but also because Western Balkan countries, maybe with the extension of Croatia, were also issuing countries of migrants. To conclude the German part, we can observe on the one hand that the German leadership has offered many tools. As I mentioned, the Berlin process, for instance, as platforms and new projects for the countries, but these platforms and initiatives can be understood only as an alternative for the EU accession at best, and something like a sort of a waiting room for the EU. And one big obstacle for the accession of the countries to the European Union is the continuing, I wouldn't say hostile, but a negative attitude of the German public towards further accession of countries to the European Union. The Eurobarometer statistics can support these statements. It is something, it is a topic, enlargement policy and enlargement as such, with which elections cannot be won in today's Germany. And we have to view these developments also. I think I would stop here, and so to leave enough time or so for the other co-authors, and then we can come back to the topic later on during this session. So thank you.
Thank you, Tamás. As we could see from your comments, the economic aspects became more dominant in case of Germany compared to the US. And if we consider the fact that basically the EU and the European cooperation framework started from economic ground, then we could say it's a proper coincidence when it comes to it's a proper framework also for Germany, which put a lot emphasis on economic cooperation when it comes to its foreign policy, and the economic cooperation compose a very significant part of its foreign policy. When it comes to Turkey, it's much harder to define such a framework or strict frameworks in the one specific area of influence. So I believe Zoltán Egeresi will have a bit more difficulties to point out only one or two aspects when it comes to Turkish influence in the region. But as we will see, because of its long history with the region, it's a kind of natural consequence that Turkey's relation with the region is so complex and less one. It has no one single line to on which we can define its presence in the region. Zoltán.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, and Türk olan seyircilerimizi de selamlıyorum. So my task was in this book, beautiful and wonderful book project to write a chapter about the Turkish foreign policy in the Balkans. And yeah, it was a really hard task because, as you mentioned previously, Turkish stance in the region or towards the region is really complex issue because compared to the other powers, other countries, the US, Germany, China, Russia, Turkey is the smallest one among these great powers or middle powers, if you want, and especially in terms of economy or in terms of population. However, it's the closest country historically and geographically to the region. That's why it's really important. And this feature, this pattern really shaped Turkish foreign policy towards the region. And here I would like to emphasize three crucial features of Turkish foreign policy. First of all, Turkish foreign policy, it's in a great manner, it's identity-based, identity-driven foreign policy, and it's usually outlined as a kind of kin state policy towards especially the Muslim population, Muslim communities living in the Western Balkans, due to the historical fact in the Turkish society, not just the leading elite of the country, but I would say the whole society sees that these people are the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. So Turkey has to do something in order to develop them, in order to protect them. And even during the 90s, when we could witness the Balkan Wars, dismemberment of Yugoslavia, there were huge protests, especially pro-Bosniak protests in Turkey, and this kind of linkage has become really embedded in the ruling political party as well, due to the fact that we have an Islamist political leadership in Turkey, and in their rhetoric and also in their political move, this kind of identity and pro-Islam, pro-Muslim community-driven foreign policy is really emphasized, and it occupies a really important part. And also, in the other aspect, Turkey has a really large Balkan diaspora as well. Of course, the immigration from the Balkans to Turkey has several waves, and it's a long story. But even in Istanbul or under Western Turkish city, you can find small neighborhoods which are Albanians or other Bosniaks. So the political leadership, even at the local level, but at the greater level as well, has a really close contact with these Balkan people, and it also has a kind of influence in Turkish foreign policy, at least at the level of rhetoric. And in close relation of this aspect, Turkey always puts really important emphasis on soft power capabilities. So if you go to the Western Balkans, you will find the emblem of the TIKA, the Turkish Development Agency, almost everywhere, but especially in the Muslim inhabited regions. And also the Yunus Emre, so the Turkish Cultural Institutes were firstly opened in the region, outlining that this soft power as a key aspect in Turkish foreign policy. The other really important factor in the Turkish relations, the stability and security. Turkey intends to become and to behave as a kind of security provider in the region. That's why during the last 30 years, it always appeared in the peacekeeping mission, and still we have Turkish troops in Bosnia and in Kosovo, and also in every aspect it tried to defend, as it was already mentioned, the Muslim population. So it's just a really short and I think meaningful aspect. After this spring non-paper affair, which really highlighted the internal dialogue, the problems with the border regions. So the Turkish foreign minister after this issue visited Ljubljana, and after Sarajevo and in Bosnia, he declared that Turkey is really committed in the stability of the region and the stability of Bosnia, and no new borders, and Turkey do not support any kind of change in the current political situation. And thirdly, I would like to emphasize that in terms of economy, we can see a rather economic pragmatism from the Turkish side. So even if this identity-based, Muslim community-based foreign policy really important for Turkey, but in terms of business, Turkey or Turkish businessmen rather prefer to go to bigger markets, and that's why we have, or Turkey have, let's say today, more business with Serbia, which is a rather Orthodox country and not a Muslim one, compared to Bosnia or Kosovo and Albania. So the size, the infrastructure, the economic possibilities really matters in the economic terms, even if we can see during the last years, during the last 10 years, a rising Turkish investment and trading activities in the region, and probably it will be permanent in the upcoming future. And here it's really important to emphasize that this policy is really based on the current situation in Turkey, as the country is facing a kind of economic crisis, and in the long run, or in the given context, it can harm the Turkish activities in the region. But we will see what will happen in the upcoming years. Thank you, and here I would like to give the floor back.
Thank you very much, Zoltan, for giving such an introduction regarding Turkey's complex relation with the region. Obviously, we did not have enough time to go into so much in detail, but hopefully we will come back to some parts of the chapter of your chapter. Now, last but not least, I would like to turn to Ágnes Szunomár regarding China. As it was also partly touched upon by the commissioner, that there are many questions that appear when it comes to Chinese presence in the region regarding fiscal sustainability and so on and so forth. And this basically highlights that one major framework for the Chinese influence is economic and financial. And I would like to ask you to introduce a bit what is the major framework of this approach of China, and what are the main characteristics of the Chinese foreign policy in the Western Balkans.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, as well as for the possibility to contribute to this book, which I think that fills in a gap that has been at least missing for some time. So I think that China is an outlier in many sense. So it is not an old player in the Western Balkans, so we cannot speak about historic or ideological type of connection between China and the Western Balkan countries. And it was even difficult for us to fit into the framework the editors created for the book. So to divide the chapter into different sections dedicated to economic relations or political relations, since in the case of Chinese foreign policy, usually economic and political relations go hand in hand, which means that it cannot really separable. But anyway, we did it, and I think that we have managed to create an interesting framework, interesting informations, which all of you can read in the book. And indeed, we cannot find too many topics where the Chinese presence is strong in the Western Balkans. It is mainly in the field of economics, but as I've mentioned, together with some political relations, since usually for China, building strong political relations, strong economic relations, always need some kind of political friendship beforehand. So China builds strong relations with those countries that at least made some efforts in the field of politics. And this is the case, this is exactly the case in the Western Balkan relations of China. When it comes to the economic terrain, where, as I've mentioned, this relationship seems to be the strongest, I wouldn't say that in all fields it is strong, since trade relations are not particularly significant. FDI, for indirect investments, are not particularly significant. Serbia is an exception here, but in all the other countries, there are not so many greenfield investment projects. For instance, since with greenfield projects or mergers and acquisitions, China is more targeting the EU member countries, if Central and Eastern Europe. It's infrastructure. So if we have to name just one terrain, just one field where China is pushing forward very strongly, then it's definitely infrastructure building. So when approaching different type of countries, including European countries, usually China tries to find topics where both sides can achieve mutual understanding, topics that can be labeled, if you like, positive by all parties involved, which means that, for instance, in the case of the core EU countries, so in the case of Scandinavian countries or Germany, Chinese believe that one of these topics is climate change, for instance, while infrastructure development seems to be the key issue for countries in Central and Eastern Europe, in the Western Balkans in particular. And of course, this connects quite well, not just to the 16+1 and later on 17+1, and now again 16+1 initiative, as well as to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. This means also that the patterns of Chinese infrastructure projects in Europe are the mirror opposite of FDI patterns. So while the majority of Chinese outward FDI flows to the core EU countries, infrastructure projects are implemented rather in the Western Balkans. The reason for that seems to be quite obvious. The infrastructure is relatively poor in the Western Balkans. There are fewer political and economic complaints about China. Strict EU rules and regulations do not hamper negotiations and processes. And finally, other financial resources such as EU structural funds are not available or less accessible. This means that China creates both challenges and opportunities for the Western Balkan region when it comes to infrastructure, since construction projects such as the Pupin Bridge over the River Danube in Serbia, or different type of planned railways or other highways all over the region can help developing the Western Balkan countries' infrastructure. But at the same time, these projects also posing some risk in terms of increased reliance on Chinese loans, since these projects are not FDI projects, so these are not foreign direct investments, but these are construction projects based on Chinese loans, which means that 85% in average of all those projects are financed from Chinese loans, where the interest rate is not preferential at all. It is causing quite a lot of troubles for many countries around the globe, and already countries in the Western Balkans as well. So there are quite some strings attached to this. So for instance, the commissioner mentioned the question of corruption. And since China's secretive business practices make it more difficult to fight corruption across the Western Balkan region, cooperation with China is rather counterproductive in the Western Balkans effort to join the EU. As the commissioner mentioned, this is going to happen sooner or later. If you ask me, the main motivation or the main reason for the Western Balkan countries to engage more and more with China and with Chinese construction projects is the fact that they became a bit disappointed in the EU accession procedure. And as a result, they turned towards non-EU players such as Russia or China. And besides those highways and railways and the potential corruption as an attachment to all these projects, there are some other issues connected to the already mentioned climate change that is an important target for the European Union. China is also building or constructing or reconstructing power plants, coal-fired power plants in the Western Balkan region, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Serbia, in some other countries as well, which is again against those strategies and directions the European Union is heading. And as a result, it can help deepening the gap between the Western Balkan countries and the European Union. And I stop here.
Thank you very much, Ágnes. And I believe it's high time for the attendees as well to remind them to send their questions into the chat. As I would like to also remind them here, not only in the chat function, so they won't miss the opportunity to raise their questions to the authors and Ambassador Garčević. And before I give the floor to the questions, I would like to turn to Vesko Garčević and ask him, because unfortunately we do not have the author, Sándor Ackermann, who wrote the chapter on Russia. But I would like to ask you as well to comment on the Russian influence in the region. And as you also deal with China quite extensively in recent months, I'm pretty sure you might comment on the Chinese influence in the region. So the floor is yours, and we are looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, Anna. I first want to thank you for inviting me to be today with you and participate in this event. I want also to thank to the authors of the book, a really interesting volume, and I would say as one coming from the Balkans, from the Western Balkans, so involved in research when it comes to, as I call them, external actors in all parts of the world. I find it very thoughtful, interesting, accurate, and since I'm going to teach next spring a course of Balkans between European Union and China and Russia, I will definitely ask my students to turn to your contribution, because I find it up to date, and in general I agree with most of your findings, particularly with what colleague Ágnes Szunomár just mentioned when it comes to what motivates countries from the region to be engaged in cooperation with China and Russia. Exactly, we should look at the EU side in order to find what makes Russia and China so attractive in the eyes of people in Montenegro, for example, or in Serbia or in Bosnia and Herzegovina. If I may briefly, I will first outline the issue with the European Union is, and then briefly about Russia, because I'm not the author, so therefore I cannot speak on behalf of the author, and also I don't want to take time of authors. I think that they need to be in the limelight, not me. So first of all, I want to tell that when it comes to the Balkans and the European Union, I would like to highlight something that I call dichotomy, which is only present in all the member states of Western Balkans. What is the dichotomy that I refer to? At the surface, when it comes to political elites, I would say that they still promote the reform agenda, and they still keep European Union membership as a strategic goal, and all of them besides Serbia keep NATO membership as their priority. But as you know well, reform capacity of the region has never been its strong card, and the European Union has played so far a very important role, and the EU membership incentivized the process of reform. But now I think the normative power of European Union has been waning for some time, and as the Commissioner mentioned rightly, it is also for European Union to, not just for countries to deliver. What has happening in the last several years, it's an example that if countries are to be judged by deeds, as it has been often mentioned or insisted on, highlighted by European Commission rightly, members of the European Union rightly, I think that we now, countries from the region, have like a strong argument turning back to the European Union, asking them to deliver what they promised, because it is a question of credibility of the process which was launched back in 2003 in Thessaloniki. To deliver in this particular case means to open accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania, to grant visa liberalization to Kosovo, because those three countries have met criteria for it, and then to work intensively to show political commitment when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to help Bosnia and Herzegovina to meet criteria necessary to become candidate. But given that, given that, then I see that narratives who change the role of European Union in the Balkans have been growing, and people who advocate that their political narratives and strength is gaining ground. That opens the door for China and Russia to play more important role. They are opportunistic or practical, call them as you like, but nevertheless, after several years now, particularly China, they can present themselves as viable models, models that can serve as an alternative to European Union model. The way how they promote development and governance models stands in stark contrast to, with the European Union model of reforms. But nevertheless, deep down, it is functionally closer to regional political elites, and they understand doing business with China better than doing business with European Union and Brussels. There are so many, preconditions to be met when if you want to get a loan to invest in your infrastructural projects back home. And there is only one precondition to be met if you want to get from China, is just to talk to them secretly, and they will give you at least what is seen as a soft loan. They will give you the soft loan which you need. So I will also highlight what I think Tamás mentioned, the new type of approach when it comes to Western Balkans and accession negotiation process, which means indeed I'm first of all encouraged with what the commissioner said, that Western Balkans will be in focus this year. But I think the current approach needs to be upgraded further in order to work, because maybe I'm so pessimistic, but I don't think that current approach will be working. I think that we will have the same situation here next year or the year after, and so on and so forth. What he called Tamás, so-called slice approach, I will call it approach in several steps, which means giving a chance countries to integrate into European Union in certain areas once they meet criteria in that particular area according to their niche capability, according to certain capabilities that they can offer. This can offer, along the road, which is now 20 years long, and it may last 15 more years, something for them to have, because it is too long to wait for 20 years or 25 years. In the meantime, nothing happening. You have some benchmarks, but benchmarks maybe means something for European Commission, but nothing for voters in Western Balkans. You need to give them either some type of integration into the single market, or if they meet criteria and align completely with foreign policy and security policy, to include them somehow, to feel this ownership, to feel and to offer something back home as a result of the accession of the approach towards the European Union. When it comes to Russia, briefly in a minute, Russia has been around for centuries. It's not a new power like China. When it comes to China, as Ágnes mentioned, I agree fully with it. We don't know exactly what it's a new partner, it's a new player, it's a mystery for somehow, and we don't know well what the result of its involvement will be. We just can assess what the immediate effects of Chinese involvement are. When it comes to Russia, we understand and what Russia. Where Russia stands, what Russia wants, and it is very similar to Turkish approach. It has really strong soft power, and that soft power sometimes people from, particularly in the US, since I'm now in the US, miss. They look at economic figures, they look at Russia's strength, global strength or weaknesses, but don't understand how Russia uses what it has at disposal, for example, cultural closeness, language, religion, in order to penetrate societies, particularly Orthodox societies, not just in the Western Balkans, that includes Bulgaria, for example, and to some extent Greece, and to remain influential. 4 areas it uses, and I will stop here. It uses, definitely culture and religion as one. It loses energy as a sector when Russia has a comparative advantage. Military cooperation, and something which I can call outsourcing foreign direct investments to their tycoons and people who bring in money to invest in the Balkans, and in many cases that money is connected to the state but is not visible. There's a money brought by tycoons or businessmen who want to invest in the Balkans, in most cases, not respecting European standards. I will stop here, and I'm waiting for questions to be raised by audience.
Thank you very much, Vesko. Actually, you just perfectly touched upon the soft power and cultural relation question, which came from our colleague Ferenc Németh, who asked about the soft power and great power's attractiveness to the citizens. Actually, he also pointed Germany as an example, and the US because of as a destination for migration, although I would add it rather applies to Germany at this moment. But it might apply also for Turkey as well, I believe. So I might ask those colleagues who covered these questions to reflect on this aspect of soft power of those actors they covered. Who would like to take it first?
Then I will start if it's fine, because the question mentions Germany first. So I will talk about the German side. So as I wrote it, I don't know if I mentioned it yet, but there is an extensive there are extensive cultural ties between Germany and the region. One issue was the question of the minorities. From the German side, it has been strongly reduced during the last century, but from the Western Balkan side, it has been highly increased, especially in the last 10 years. The German language is, I think, the second most spoken foreign language after English in the Western Balkans when it comes to high school and school education. There are many, I think, in every capital. I'm not sure about Pristina, but about the other national capitals. The Goethe Institute is also present. There are many town twinning partnerships between German cities and towns and cities of in the Western Balkan region, especially when it comes to the southern Bundesländer, Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria, because of the Schwaben, this German minority who are around the Danube. There are many corporations. And maybe one last thing, which is like a personal remark. When I was traveling through the region in 2015, I have friends and I know people from the region. And one thing when I was asked about, or when I asked them, about German influence and how Germany is perceived, one thing, but especially Serbian guys used to tell me is the German cars. So in order, it is like a transmitter of this cultural thingy and how the German economy and the German manufactured goods are perceived. It is, you have to own a German car. It is non-negotiable. I think with Germany, the ties when it comes to religion, which is very strong when it comes to Turkish influence or Russian influence, I think it's not that strong through the Lutheran Church. Yeah, there are some connections, but it is not expressing this national the influence of the religion than it in the other two cases. It is more subtle, I think, in the German case in other areas. This is from me.
Zoltán, would you like to take this question, or yeah?
Okay, I can. So concerning Turkish influence, yeah, it's tangible. For example, when I was traveling in the region a couple of years ago, in Novi Pazar, so in South Serbia, in Kosovo, or North Macedonia, it was interesting to see when, especially you go to smaller cities, towns, and their international bus stations, where these bus companies, the buses are going, and I think, if I remember well, yeah, the majority of the buses went to Germany, so went to the west. However, you could see a really great number of buses going to Istanbul. So from this aspect, linking to the immigration issue, yeah, Turkey is present in the mind of these people, especially in the Muslim communities. Of course, the case is totally different in the Orthodox population, but concerning the Muslims, yeah, it's tangible, and the soft power activities of the Turkish state, especially the development agency, is rather based on the Muslim inhabited regions. Even if you look at or check their list of renovation and contribution to several projects, schooling and agricultural project, whatever, you can find examples, for example, from Vojvodina as well, even in the Hungarian inhabited region as well, but the majority is rather based in the Muslim inhabited regions, and especially as the Turkish state intends to defend this Ottoman legacy, so it's so apparent that the Turkish agency is renovating, kind of rebuilding the old Ottoman mosques, bridges, and several of them got a high publicity in the Turkish state. I mean, in Turkey itself, you can see TV programs in several TV channels when these events are, their opening are broadcasted. And here is really important point that, yeah, Turkey intends to, let's say, protect these Muslim communities. However, it's a really important political project to sell this defending activity to its own citizens as well. So that's why this kind of events are really integral part of the Turkish identity policy, not just outside of the country, but in the local or in the domestic context as well. And for example, within this framework, you can find, especially in Kosovo or in North Macedonia, given really important lieu de mémoire in the context of the Ottoman past, school buses from all around from Turkey, which bring lots of students who can visit this old, I don't know, battlefield or mosque or other remnants linked to a given really important Ottoman Sultan. So here the point is that, yeah, Turkey intends to do lots of stuff, soft power activities in the region in order to strengthen the position of the Muslims, but it's also a really important part of the domestic political projects, and probably the most palpable of this relation. The most palpable element of this relation is the Srebrenica cult in the region and in Turkey. So in the anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre in Turkey, there are several programs devoted to this event during the whole day. There are in several cities, in several museums, exhibition about Srebrenica, and even in several local community in Turkey, municipality organizes some programs in order to remember the event. And it's also broadcasted in the Balkans as well. So this kind of linkage is really important, and that's why for several people, I wouldn't say that ordinary Kosovars or Bosniak would choose Turkey instead of Germany in terms of immigration or emigration, but lots of people will decide, of course not the majority, to go to Turkey due to educational exchange program, due to educational opportunities and so on. And it's also important to emphasize that in the Western Balkans, we have a tiny Turkish minority in Kosovo and in North Macedonia, a couple of 10,000 people who, of course, focus rather on Turkey. And we have an even larger community, Turkish minority community in Bulgaria, but of course, Bulgaria wasn't part of this analysis. Okay, thank you.
May I join
Gergely,
in?
please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. So I would like to jump in on the soft power question. And obviously, the number of foreign workers, immigrants, are one important aspect of one's soft power and external actor soft power in a given region. And that is the case, of course, with Western Balkans countries in relation to Germany, the United States, or Turkey as well. But when we are speaking about the soft power, we also have to look at other indicators of soft power. And one very important indicator, of course, is but to put it simply, the likability of one's foreign policy towards that specific region, especially. So how well the given specific foreign actors' foreign policy resonates well within the region. And here, the United States and European countries, Western European countries, such as Germany as well, of course, often likes to portray themselves as the champions of democracy, rule of law, anti-corruption. And certainly they have done a lot and have helped the region a lot in terms of expertise, in terms of assistance, funds throughout the past 20 years in these areas. But we have to also take into consideration that they have not always been honest brokers, even within these areas as well. And at times they have been also biased, either between quarrels between countries, such as, for instance, Kosovo and Serbia. No one really considers the United States as completely impartial on the matter, looking back in the past 20-25 years. Or even when it comes to domestic politics, for instance, North Macedonia, just a couple of years ago, it was not just China or Russia who had certain political agendas. So we have to take also into consideration that the publics within these countries, they do evaluate as well the foreign policy of external actors, and including Western actors, how they influence the domestic politics, and how do they perceive whether they are in line with their own country's interest or with the interest of that certain group of population. So this is also true for the United States as well. And certainly there are differences when it comes to certain countries in the Western Balkans, when it comes to US soft power influence, if we put it that way. Of course, in Albanian-speaking regions, usually the US is much more popular, even today, than, for instance, in Serbia, to name another. And this will likely remain so in the coming years as well. And this has also the historic, partly even cultural aspects as well, which cannot be changed overnight.
Thank you very much, Gergely. Mr. Garčević?
Maybe Ágnes can be, but I will be there at the end.
As you wish. Then I would give the floor to Ágnes.
Okay, so I think that again, China is a special case as it is not as attractive for Western Balkan societies as Germany or the US, but still there are some soft power kind of efforts China is taking in the region. Beyond, of course, Confucius Institutes, different type of academic exchanges, as well as cultural cooperation. There's one specific aspect of cooperation between China and the Balkans that deserve, I think, international attention as it points towards Beijing's new era of interest. And this is the recent focus on cooperation and innovation. So given the lack of resources to invest and develop the field of creative industries, especially starting in the Balkan region, Beijing's move towards this area of cooperation clearly represents some kind of a soft power strategy. I'm sure that some of you have already heard about smart city programs Huawei is running in, for instance, Belgrade, but there are so many other similar programs all around the region negotiated right now. And one thing that is interesting besides all these features I've just mentioned is some kind of an indirect power China is having in the region, especially in the case of Serbia, where it is not the Chinese side, but the Serbian government that is doing a good PR for China and Chinese culture and Chinese society and the Chinese way of development when calling China the best friend of, for instance, Serbia, praising all those gifts and support in the COVID pandemic. So I think that this is again some kind of an example of China's soft power, and in this case, it is coming indirectly with the help of some of the governments of the Western Balkan region.
I just want to make 3 points from the Western Balkans perspective. First of all, again, to highlight this, what I mentioned at the beginning, is the dichotomy, and that reinforces what you have said. When I was in charge of NATO in my country, running the campaign for NATO membership of Montenegro, we were doing every month two polling agencies were about membership of NATO. What was like a thing that continued all the time is this, that people, when asked when you would like to work in the future, or when would you send your kids to study, or if you have a problem with, if you have a health problem and you cannot find solution in your country, when would you go to be cured, or to be, and then in all those questions, people were answering 90% that they would either go to the European Union members, any of them, either for studying or for health or for standards of living. But when asked about preference, cultural preference, then depending on whether they are like, I don't know, Orthodox Christians or Muslims, they had their own preference and their own countries that they were put first as their preference. This is one of the issue, and this should be taken, kept in mind all the time. When it comes to the how China or Russia do soft power, I would like to highlight in Chinese case, and particularly that it, I would say, presents its model of its governance model and model of development now as a viable alternative. And that viable alternative worked particularly well during the vaccination process, early stage of vaccination. You know that the European Union had a problem with the vaccine rollout, whereas China and Russia offered vaccines to Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and not just offering that, they offered this with the message, with the narrative that we were able to do so because we work differently, and our system works differently. Coming back to China, I don't know whether you know one example.
Chinese embassy was bombed in 1999 during NATO campaign, and that particularly fits to what Gergely said about how politics and soft power interplay. So what China in Serbian government has been doing now for some time is actually China decided to build the biggest cultural center in the Balkans, which will be located in that building. And this is an example how soft power works, and the message has different layers. One of them is why China is doing that. Another layer is message to the public, and the third is message to the European Union and NATO members. And one more thing, for example, Russia's Gazprom invested $4 million into the interior of Sveti Sava Basilica, the largest basilica, the largest church, Orthodox church in the Balkans. So by doing that, with the $4 million, which for country is very little money, I think they made like a huge outreach.
Thank you very much for all of your comments on the soft power. And as we are reaching the end of our event, I would like to raise one question, which is also a bit, it's for conclusion, but also for a bit outlook for the future. So what do you think, because we've mentioned a couple of areas where there are there might be overlapping interests of the foreign actors that have been covered in the volume. I mean, when it comes to army export, we might mention, it might appear that Germany and the US has a kind of competition, or when it comes to economic cooperation and infrastructure projects, there might be also some competition among the actors. So my question would be, which do you consider as a field where these actors could step on each other's feet in the future? And also, if you would like to add anything as a concluding remarks, please use this last opportunity. Thank you very much. We might start from the back way, so starting with Ágnes, if she's happy with this.
Okay, so I think that China is stepping on the toes of all of the aforementioned players. So it can create competition, especially in the field of economic relations, especially in the field of infrastructure. But it is more from a European point of view. So Europe now seems to consider China as a systemic rival, but at least based on the Chinese communication, China would rather build this relationship based on harmony and communication and peace and so on and so forth, which means that China seems to be more open to negotiate, to communicate and build joint projects and create joint strategies in the Western Balkans. But it seems that from the European point of view, from the developed world's point of view, China is rather a rival, and it creates competition in the Western Balkans as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Zoltán?
Yeah, from one point of view, Turkey creates some kind of competition, of course, for the whole region. But as I already mentioned, in the economic terms, Turkey is not a great player in the whole region. Even if Turkish investment, especially in Serbia, is rising during the last years, it cannot compete with other actors, especially with the EU members, especially with Germany. And also there are no special sectors where the Turkish companies are so apparent, like in case of Russia's investment in Serbian energy sector and so on. But what I can mention that the Turkish companies, if they are somewhere active, let's say, it's still or it's rather infrastructural projects. However, from time to time they try to act together to make cooperation with Western companies, even with American companies, like in building highway in Kosovo and so on. So we can find several example for that. And in general, in terms of infrastructural projects, and it's rather important for the Hungarian investments, Turks are more active in the, let's say, southern part of the region. So Kosovo, given case of southern Serbia, Macedonia, and so on, while the northern part of the region is less affected, let's say, by Turkish investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoltán. Tamás?
It's a hard question, actually. Yeah, on several and different issues, Germany has, in my opinion, like concurring interest when it comes with the Chinese policy of what just Ágnes mentioned about upgrading and renewing the coal industry. It is completely against the EU's interest of energy transition and supporting the green transition. To mention one, on the one hand, with Russia's interest of hampering the accession of the Western Balkan countries to NATO, which it was very clearly and visible in the case of Montenegro. It is against the German interest, but on the other hand, the German public and the German policy makers are also getting more and more aware of Russia's active measures and Russian intelligence's action within their own country. So I think here we will observe a change late, probably after the German election in this September, when the government will be changed again, and most probably they will have a different position and policies towards Germany. When it comes to United States, I think one issue or you touched upon, it could be a competition when it comes to arms sales. On the one hand, and on the other hand, the US's approach is a bit more focused on hardcore elements of security, by Germany through development aid and through not through these kind of soft elements are having different positions in many cases. So it's not that evident that in the case, for instance, of China, or for instance, in the case of the US or Russia, but we can find certain elements in various fields, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, when it comes to the authors, it's Gergely. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I would begin by answering this question on referring to China and Russia in a way that I think they have an excellent record of how to maximize political impact of relatively smaller amount of financial or other kind of political investment in a given country. And this is not true, not just in the Western Balkans, but certainly there are cases, and it has been mentioned in this discussion as well by Ambassador Vesko Garčević as well. So if we compare the amounts of funds, aid, trade of Europe, or in certain areas, even the US, of how much financial investments or economic investments have been made into the region with these Eastern powers, we see that there are some very highly visible projects of these Eastern powers which have rather significant political influence or impact on that given country. And in this perspective, I believe that Western countries, the US and Germany in particular as well, have to be more strategic in a way. And that doesn't involve always just investing more and putting more and more money into the region. sometimes there needs to be some more creativity as well, and understanding of the political dynamics of the region as well, if it wants to influence political developments in certain countries as well. And in this context, I believe the US oftentimes as well in this region has basically exercised more so just sticks rather than carrots when it comes to projecting influence. So it would need to be, when it comes to exercising its foreign policy in the region, it has to be more diverse and then more creative, and putting maybe more carrots to the table as well, with this strategic mindset as well, as I referred to. With this, I would thank you and give back the word to Anna.
And before I would end this interesting discussion, let me give the floor once again to Vesko Garčević. So how he sees the future of this competition, and at least how, I mean, it's how might the political elite would take advantage or try to turn this whole situation to its own benefit.
I would say at one point, I will not repeat what my colleagues have said, because I agree with what they said. I think that we have the same understanding of what's going on in there. When it comes to political elites in the region, don't underestimate them. They are very smart. They know how to use China and Russia against the European Union when they need it. They use them as a bargaining chip, and they play on it. But what worries me is what the result of that very dangerous, risky play will be, not for them, but for people living, for citizens, and for advancements towards the European Union. And I see this as a risk, because I see that the development models, the way how they cooperate, how they do business with China, get us away from the European Union more and more. On top of it, we have the European Union, as we discussed, that has a problem with its normative power in the region for different reasons. For that, we can have another discussion. And one more point. Interesting enough, that China and Russia so far don't see one another as competitors in this part of the world. I would say they see them as a sharing market companies, two companies that share the market. And in many cases, their policies are complementary, which means what China offers, Russia cannot offer. Russia has no money to offer. What Russia offers is comfort through religion, culture, blah, blah, this, blah, that, and it's been there for centuries, what China is missing. And who is a victim on, I think I see two victims. One first immediate victim, I'm not, don't take me wrong, I'm not against cooperating with China or Russia, because you cannot but do it. Those are big powers. I'm speaking about the way how we do it. And the victims are countries for the long run, and citizens at the end of the day, our accession process.
Thank you very much. So in this regard, it will be really interesting and important to follow up what Commissioner Várhelyi said, whether this year will be really the year of the Western Balkans. So it might give some hope for the future that the strategic approach the strategic approach will be strengthened on the side of the EU, which could strengthen also the EU integration process and the membership perspective for those countries. I would like to thank all the contributors to the volume, as well as Vesko Garčević, for joining this this panel discussion. Thank you very much, Ágnes Szunomár and Zoltán Egeresi, to contributing to the volume. Also, Gergely and Tamás, I'm very thankful that you not only brought your own part, but also dealt with the editing and made lots of efforts to make this project happen and to get real. As Márton Ugrósdy mentioned, the first printed copies are now available also in the Institute, but also the volume will be available online. So I encourage everyone to read it. Obviously, here within such a limited time frame, we did not have the chance to get into all the details that have been covered in the volume, and so don't miss the opportunity to learn even more about those foreign actors that we mentioned today. And I can promise that the Institute will carry on to do research and analysis on this topic, because it's very important for it's a priority for the Institute as well. So we hope that we will have the chance to discuss either within this framework or also with other experts this topic, and hopefully we will have the chance to contribute to the debate on the foreign actors and their activities in the region in the future as well. So thank you very much, and looking forward to see also the audience on later events, hopefully soon in person as well, when the pandemic situation allows us to do so. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening, and have a nice day, Vesko, in the US. Thank you very much.